She wasn't supposed to be on his porch. She wasn't supposed to be anywhere near his life. Victoria Hale, worth more than most small countries, photographed in boardrooms across 3 continents, stood at Ethan Mercer's front door at 11 o'clock on a Wednesday night, soaking wet, holding a single black bag, because her own daughter had told her she had 48 hours to disappear. She could have gone anywhere. She chose him, and neither of them would ever fully understand why, until it was almost too late. If this story already has you hooked, hit that like button and drop your city in the comments below. I want to see exactly how far this story travels. Now, settle in, because this one is going to take a while, and it is absolutely worth it. The boat had been in pieces for 11 days. Ethan Mercer stood in his workshop behind the house, a single work light hanging from a hook above his head, and stared at the hull of a 1962 Chris Craft Cavalier like it owed him something. The wood was soft in 3 places along the starboard side. The varnish had gone gray and peeling. Whoever had owned this boat before had stored it in a leaking shed for God knows how many years and called it preserved. Ethan had paid good money for it at an estate auction 6 weeks ago, driven it home on a flatbed trailer, and now stood looking at it the way a man looks at a decision he might regret. He didn't regret it. That was the thing. He never did, with boats. People were a different story. He set down his caliper tool, picked up a bottle of water from the workbench, and drank half of it standing there in the quiet. Outside, the wind had started coming in off the Savannah River. He could hear it moving through the Spanish moss in the oak tree at the back of the yard, that low whispering sound that always made the neighborhood feel older than it was. Storm was rolling in from the coast. He'd checked the radar that morning. By midnight, it would be heavy. He checked his phone. 10:47 p.m. He should go inside. He had to get Lily up at 6:30 tomorrow for school, and she always woke up twice in the night when there was thunder. Had since she was 2. She was 5 now, and still did it, padding down the hallway in her socks, pushing open his door, climbing in beside him without saying anything because she never needed to. He'd just pull the blanket up, and she'd fall back asleep in about 4 minutes. He'd lie there the rest of the night half awake. He didn't mind. He genuinely didn't. That was one of the things that surprised him about fatherhood. How little he minded the inconveniences of it, the interruptions, the loss of sleep and quiet and autonomy. He'd expected to. He remembered expecting to before Lily was born, turning the idea over in his head with a kind of private dread. His own father had been a man who minded inconveniences loudly. Ethan had assumed that was inherited. Apparently not. He capped the water bottle, switched off the work light, and walked back toward the house through the dark yard. The first fat drops of rain were starting to come down, speckling the flagstone path, and he picked up his pace. The back porch light was on. He always left it on when he was working late, for no practical reason, just habit. The kitchen window glowed yellow. He could see the cereal bowl Lily had left on the counter, despite being told twice to put it in the sink. He stepped up onto the porch and opened the back door. The storm hit about an hour after he'd gone to bed. He heard it before he felt it, the change in pressure, the way the rain went from ordinary to aggressive in about 30 seconds, the oak tree starting to move in a way it didn't usually move. He lay in the dark and listened to it, not quite awake, not quite asleep. The temperature had dropped. He'd left a window cracked in the hallway and could feel the cool air coming under his bedroom door. He was almost under again when the doorbell rang. He blinked at the ceiling. It rang again. He sat up, checked his phone. 11:22 p.m. He stood, pulled on the jeans he'd left over the chair, and walked out into the hallway. Lily's door was still closed. Good. He went downstairs in the dark, not turning on lights because they'd wake her if she happened to be near waking, navigating by memory. 14 steps. Turn left. 4 steps to the landing. Turn right. The loose board second from the bottom. Step over it. He looked through the peephole. He looked for a long moment. Then he unlocked the door and opened it. Victoria Hale stood on his front porch in the rain. She was wearing a dark coat that was soaked through at the shoulders. Her hair, which he had only ever seen in photographs in the kind of precise, professional arrangements that required other people to create, was wet and loose and hanging past her collar. She had a black leather bag on her shoulder. One bag, just the one. And she was standing very straight, the way she always stood, like posture was the one thing she would not let go of under any circumstances. She looked at him. He looked at her. "I know it's late," she said. Her voice was controlled, but only just. "It's late," he agreed. "I didn't have anywhere." She stopped. Started again. "I didn't want to go to a hotel." He opened the door wider and stepped back. She came in. He took her coat. It was so wet he carried it at arm's length to the laundry room and hung it over the edge of the utility sink. When he came back, she was standing in the entry hall with her bag still on her shoulder, looking at the coat hooks on the wall. Lily's small yellow rain jacket, his own canvas work jacket, a little hand-painted wooden hook Lily had made at school that said Dad in uneven capital letters. "Sit down," Ethan said. "I'll make tea." "You don't have to." "I know I don't have to. Sit down, Victoria." She sat at the kitchen table. He could hear her breathing settle while he filled the kettle and set it on the stove. He didn't ask her anything yet. He'd learned something about people in the years since his divorce, a thing that took him a while to figure out. When someone finally shows up somewhere they weren't planning to show up, the worst thing you can do is make them explain themselves before they're ready. The explanation always comes. Give it a minute. He found 2 mugs, put a bag in each one, waited for the kettle. The rain was coming down hard now, rattling the kitchen window. The lights flickered once and held. "She told me I had 2 days," Victoria said. He didn't turn around. 2 days to do what? "To get my things out of the house." A pause. "The Ardsley Park house, the one I bought her and Drew when they got married." He turned around then, leaning back against the counter. Victoria was looking at her hands on the table. The bag was on the floor beside her chair now. "She said she needed her space," Victoria continued. Her voice had flattened out into something careful and measured, the kind of tone you use when you've had the conversation in your head so many times, it's worn grooves. "She said I'd been," her word was suffocating, "that I don't know how to be a guest. I only know how to be in charge. That having me there was making her feel like she was living in my house instead of her own." The kettle began to whistle. He poured the water. "Was she wrong?" he asked. Victoria looked up. He brought the mugs to the table and sat across from her. "No," she said after a moment. "She wasn't entirely wrong." He wrapped his hands around his mug. "So why here?" She looked at him directly for the first time since she'd come in. Her eyes were steady. That was one of the things about Victoria Hale. Her eyes were always steady, even when everything else about her was telling a different story. They were dark eyes, almost black in this light, and there was something in them now that he didn't have a name for. "Because I've sat across from you at that kitchen table for 3 Thanksgivings and 2 Christmases," she said. "Because you're the only person in the extended orbit of my daughter's life who has never wanted anything from me. And because," she stopped, picked up her mug, "and because I was driving and I ended up here, and that seemed like enough of an answer." He thought about that. "How long?" he said. "I don't know, a few days, a week, until I figure out." She shook her head slightly. "I have properties. I have an apartment in Atlanta. I could have gone to my attorney's guest suite she's offered before. "A week is fine," Ethan said. "You can have the guest room. It's not fancy." "I don't need fancy. It has a view of the workshop, which is a boat in pieces right now, so—" Something shifted at the corner of her mouth. Not quite a smile. "I've seen worse." He stood up, picked up his mug. "I'll get you towels." He set her up in the guest room. Fresh towels, the extra quilt from the top shelf of the hall closet, the small lamp that actually worked because he'd replaced the bulb last month. He showed her the bathroom she'd be sharing with the hallway. He explained that Lily sometimes came out of her room at night during storms, and not to be alarmed if she heard small footsteps. Victoria stood in the doorway of the guest room with the quilt in her arms and said, "She won't remember me. I've only met her a few times." "She remembers people," Ethan said. "She's got a good memory for faces. She has your eyes." It was a simple observation. He didn't know why it landed the way it did. "Yeah," he said. "Get some sleep. I'll tell her in the morning." He went back to his room, lay on top of the covers for a while, listening to the storm work itself out. He thought about the way Victoria had looked standing on his porch, That careful straightness, all that discipline holding her together when everything else was wet and undone. He thought about Lily's mother, Victoria's daughter, Claire, and what it must have taken for Claire to tell her own mother she had 2 days to leave. He knew Claire. He knew what she was capable of. He turned onto his side and eventually slept. Lily discovered Victoria at 6:54 in the morning. Ethan heard it happen. He was in the kitchen making coffee when Lily came downstairs and stopped completely still in the doorway to the hallway, staring at the guest room door, which was slightly open. Then she looked at Ethan. "There's someone in there," she said. "I know, that's Victoria. She's going to stay with us for a bit." Lily processed this with the thoroughness of a 5-year-old who takes these things seriously. "Is she our friend?" "She is." "Does she like pancakes?" Ethan considered this. He had no idea whether Victoria Hale liked pancakes. "We could ask her." As if on cue, the guest room door opened and Victoria appeared, already dressed. Dark slacks, a cream-colored blouse, hair pulled back. She looked rested in the specific way that people who have trained themselves to function on limited sleep look rested. Her eyes found Lily, and something in her expression changed slightly, softened at the edges. Lily looked up at her. "Do you like pancakes?" Victoria looked at Ethan. He shrugged faintly. "I haven't had pancakes in probably 3 years," Victoria said. Lily's eyes went wide with a kind of appalled sympathy. "That's too long," she said. "Mutta, come on." And she walked into the kitchen and pulled out the chair she considered the best one, the one with the view of the backyard, and patted it for Victoria to sit down, which Victoria did, somewhat carefully, like she wasn't entirely sure what was happening. Ethan made pancakes. He made them the way Lily liked them, which was silver dollar-sized and in batches of 5. He put blueberries in the batter because they had blueberries. He watched from the stove as Lily explained to Victoria the rules of the kitchen, which Lily had mostly invented herself. You had to wash your hands before you ate, you couldn't leave cups without coasters, and if you took the last of something, you had to write it on the list on the fridge. "There's a list?" Victoria asked. "It's very important," Lily confirmed. Victoria looked at the fridge. At the handwritten list on the yellow notepad magneted to the door, Lily's careful block printing interspersed with Ethan's adult handwriting. "I see," she said. "What happens if you break the rules?" Lily appeared to consider the weight of this question. "You have to say sorry," she said finally, as if this were the most serious possible consequence. "And you have to mean it." Victoria smiled then. A real one, not the kind she gave to cameras or conference rooms. It changed her whole face. She was already a striking woman, the kind of striking that comes from a combination of good bone structure and absolute confidence in how to move through a room. But the smile was something else. It was a glimpse of someone who hadn't always had access to boardrooms and press junkets, and the careful orchestration of how you appear to the world. Ethan put the pancakes on the table and sat down. They ate breakfast. She was supposed to stay 3 days. By the 4th day, Ethan stopped counting. It happened gradually, the way most significant things happen. Not with any single dramatic moment, but through the accumulation of small ones. Victoria had not come here to be taken care of. That was clear from the first morning. She was not a guest in the passive sense of the word. By the second afternoon, she had reorganized the pantry, not in any aggressive or conspicuous way, just quietly. While Ethan was in the workshop, things moved from where they'd been sitting haphazardly for 3 years into an arrangement that actually made sense. Pasta with pasta, canned goods in rows, Lily's snacks at Lily's height. He noticed it when he came in for water at 3 o'clock and stood in the open pantry door for a moment, looking at it. "Too much?" Victoria asked from behind him. She was sitting at the kitchen table with her laptop open, on a call. She'd muted herself when she heard him come in. "No," he said. No, it's good." He got his water and went back out. That evening she made dinner, not asked, not announced, just made it. He came in at 6 to find the kitchen smelling like something that was not the particular combination of frozen burritos and boxed pasta that had constituted roughly half his meals for the past year and a half. She'd found a whole chicken in the freezer that he'd had since November and done something to it with the herbs from the pot on the back porch that he mostly forgot to water. Lily sat at the table doing her kindergarten homework, tracing letters, and talked to Victoria about whether birds could smell, which Lily had been thinking about seriously for several days. Victoria said she wasn't sure, but that it depended on the bird, and that some vultures could smell carrion from very far away. "What's carrion?" Lily asked. "Dead things," Victoria said, without missing a beat. Lily accepted this with complete equanimity and went back to her letters. Ethan sat down, served himself and Lily, and for the first time in a long time ate a dinner that tasted like someone had thought about it. He didn't say anything, but he noticed. Eat it. The second week, he started looking forward to coming back from the workshop at the end of the day. He noticed that too. He noticed the way he'd glance at the kitchen window while he was working, that lit-up yellow square in the evening dark. He noticed how the house sounded different now. Not loud exactly, but occupied in a way it hadn't been. Victoria was not a noisy person, but there was something in the quality of silence in a house that someone else is also living in, a kind of inhabited feeling that Ethan had forgotten how much he'd missed. He had been alone for 3 years. Before that, the last 6 months of his marriage had been their own kind of alone. So it was closer to 3.5, really, before he was honest about it. He was not under any illusion about what this was. Victoria was here because her daughter had thrown her out of a house Ethan's ex-wife should have been grateful for. Victoria had options. He knew she had options. She'd said so herself on that first night. And she'd ended up here instead. That didn't mean anything except that she'd been driving and made a choice that seemed like enough of an answer. People made choices like that in moments of crisis. They meant something in the moment, and not necessarily more than that. He told himself this. He mostly believed it. 3 weeks in, he found her on the back porch at 10 o'clock on a Thursday night. He'd checked on Lily, gotten himself a beer, and wandered to the back door to look out at the yard the way he sometimes did at night. Victoria was sitting in one of the 2 old wooden chairs he kept out there, legs crossed, a glass of red wine in one hand, looking at the workshop. The light was off inside it, but the shape of the Chris Craft's hull was visible through the wide-open double doors. He'd been airing it out while he worked on the wood treatment. He pushed open the screen door, and she looked back at him. "Mind?" he asked, meaning the chair. "It's your porch," she said. He sat, took a drink of his beer. Outside, the yard was thick with the sound of crickets, that dense midsummer sound that Ethan associated so completely with Savannah that he sometimes heard it in his sleep. The oak tree was still. The air was warm and heavy in the way that June air in Georgia is always warm and heavy, like it has weight to it, like you're moving through something. "How do you fix a boat?" Victoria asked. "Carefully," he said. "Helpful." The specific answer for this one is you strip the old finish, figure out which planks are soft, replace what you can't save, treat the wood, replank where you have to, then refinish the whole thing, and then you figure out the mechanical stuff. Engine, wiring, hardware. How long does that take? Depends. This one? Probably 6 more months, and she looked at the boat in the dark. And then what? I sell it, or the person I'm building it for takes it. Depends on whether I took a commission or bought it myself. You bought this one yourself? Yeah. So you'll sell it? Eventually, or I'll take it out on the river and see how she runs and then sell it. Victoria was quiet for a moment. Do you ever keep any of them? He thought about this. No, I've thought about it, but it never quite... They're not mine. They belong out on the water. Keeping one in a yard feels wrong. She turned her head to look at him. In the ambient light from the kitchen window, her face was half lit, shadows in the hollows of her cheeks. That's a surprisingly sentimental position for a man who presents as entirely practical. I present as entirely practical? Yes. Do you disagree? He took a drink of his beer. I think I'm practical about the things I can control, he said, and sentimental about everything else. She considered this. That might be the most self-aware thing you've ever said. I have my moments. She smiled a little, looking back at the yard. A pause. The crickets. Can I ask you something? She said. You can. What did Claire tell you when she left? What did she actually say? He'd not been expecting that. Not because it was a rude question. It wasn't exactly, though it was personal, but because Victoria Hale was not typically a person who asked questions she didn't already have some idea of the answer to. In his limited but not insignificant experience of her, she gathered information before she spoke, processed it, and then spoke from a position of relative confidence. Asking him this question was an admission that she didn't know, that there was something she needed and hadn't been able to get on her own. She said she didn't want to be married to a boat repairman, Ethan said. He kept his voice neutral. She said she'd thought she could be that person, the person who was fine with that, who didn't need more. But she wasn't, and she didn't want to lie about it anymore. Victoria absorbed this. Did she say anything else? She said Lily would be fine, that she was going to be a great mother from a distance. He paused. She's tried. She has. I'll give her that. It's different, from a distance. Victoria's jaw tightened, barely perceptibly. She was always better at intentions than follow-through, she said. I don't say that to be unkind. I've watched her for 30 years. She means what she says, in the moment, and then life intervenes and she stopped, set her wine glass down on the arm of the chair with a careful click. She gets it from her father. He was the same. Enormous capacity for love in theory, in the abstract. The dailiness of it was harder. What happened to him? We divorced. When Claire was 8. He was a good man. Genuinely, I mean that without the usual caveats. He was kind and funny and bright. He just couldn't sustain the ordinary. A beat. That sounds like a criticism. I don't mean it as one. Some people are made for beginnings. He was one of them. And you? She looked at him again. I don't know what I'm made for, she said quietly. I used to think I knew. I'm good at building things, companies, structures, systems. I'm good at long-term thinking, at seeing what something could be before it is. I thought that translated to relationships, to family. She picked up her wine glass again. I'm not sure it does. He didn't fill the silence. She'd earned the right to let it sit there. She built a good life, Victoria said eventually. The edge in her voice had softened. Claire, despite everything. She's stubborn, and she's difficult, and she knows what she wants, and she usually finds a way to get it. I'm proud of her. A pause. I'm also sometimes absolutely impossible to be around. Apparently. Apparently, Ethan said. She looked at him sharply and then laughed. Not a polite laugh. A real one. A short exhale of genuine amusement. It was the first time he'd heard her do that, and it surprised him enough that he found himself smiling without quite meaning to. You're not going to argue with me, she said. You told me you could be difficult. I believe you. Why would I argue? Because most people argue. She settled back in her chair. Because telling someone you're difficult is a test half the time, to see if they'll contradict you to make you feel better. I'm not interested in making you feel better by lying to you. She looked at him for a long moment. No, she said. I know that. It's one of the reasons I came here. He didn't ask her to say more than that. They sat on the porch until her wine glass was empty and his beer was warm, and neither of them said anything especially important, but something shifted in the way they occupied the same space, quietly, without announcement. When he went inside, he rinsed his bottle and stood at the kitchen sink for a minute, looking out at nothing. Then he turned off the light and went upstairs. The 4th week, Lily started calling her Tori. Not intentionally, it just came out one morning when she was trying to get Victoria's attention quickly, running in from the backyard, something about a caterpillar she'd found. Tori, come look, hurry! Victoria had gone, had crouched in the dirt at the edge of the garden bed beside a 5-year-old and examined a caterpillar with what looked like genuine interest. Later, when Lily was in bed, Victoria had been washing dishes and said, without turning around, Tori. She's 5, Ethan said. Syllables are an investment. I'm not complaining. She handed him a wet pan to dry. My mother called me Vicky. I hated it for 20 years, and then she died, and now I'd give a lot to hear it again. He took the pan and dried it. I'm sorry. 12 years ago. She handed him another dish. You stop being actively sorry about it. But it stays. Yeah. She looked sideways at him. Have you lost anyone? My dad. 4 years ago. Heart attack, very sudden. He put the pan in the cabinet. He wasn't an easy man, but he was mine. She handed him the last dish. What was he like? Ethan thought about this with more honesty than he usually applied to the question. Rigid, he said. He had a vision of what a man should be, what a family should look like, what counted as success. I never quite fit it. My brother did. Kyle's an attorney, nice house, the whole picture. I was the one refinishing furniture in the garage when I was 17, and he appreciated the craft, I think, on some level. But he thought it was a hobby, not a life. And you made it a life anyway. I made it a life anyway. She leaned against the counter, drying her hands on the dish towel. Did he come around before he died? He told me once, about 6 months before the heart attack, that Lily was the most beautiful kid he'd ever seen, and that I was doing a good job. Ethan folded the dish towel and set it down. That was as close as he got. For him, it was a lot. Victoria looked at him. And was it enough? He thought about that honestly, the way he rarely let himself. I wanted more, he said. I wanted him to say he got it wrong, or that he saw what I'd built here and respected it. But he didn't have the language for that, so I took what he gave. He paused. And yeah, on balance, it was enough. She nodded slowly. Not to agree exactly, just to acknowledge that she'd heard him. He appreciated that. She didn't add anything. She didn't try to fix the story or put a frame around it that would make it easier to carry. She just let it be what it was. That was rarer than it should have been. The 5th week, something happened that Ethan hadn't anticipated. He came into the kitchen at 7 a.m. to find Victoria and Lily sitting on the kitchen floor with a cardboard box between them, and inside the box were the contents of the second drawer, the junk drawer. 3 years of accumulated batteries and takeout menus and rubber bands and dead pens and the small mysterious objects that end up in junk drawers without explanation. Lily was sorting batteries into a pile with tremendous seriousness. Victoria was writing something on a notepad. What's happening? Ethan said. Organization, Lily said, without looking up. The drawer has been in a state of entropy, Victoria added. We're addressing it. I didn't ask you to do that. You didn't not ask, Victoria said, and something in her tone was light in a way that was new. He stood there for a moment, in his bare feet, looking at them on the kitchen floor. Lily, with her small hands carefully sorting batteries. Victoria cross-legged beside her. Victoria Hale, in dark slacks and a silk blouse, sitting on a tile kitchen floor at 7 a.m, going through a junk drawer with a 5-year-old. He poured himself coffee and sat at the table. Do we have any actual working batteries? He asked. 3, Lily reported. The rest are dead. We need more. Can you write it on the list? He wrote batteries on the list. He found himself that evening standing in the workshop for an extra 45 minutes after he'd meant to go in for dinner. Not avoiding going in, something closer to the opposite. Something he didn't want to look at too directly, like the way you don't look directly at the sun because you already know it's there. He worked his sandpaper along the grain of the mahogany plank in his hands, back and forth, until the wood was smooth under his fingers. The boat was starting to come back. He could see what it was going to be, the same way he always could once the rot was out and the structure was clear. There was a moment in every restoration where the boat stopped being a problem and started being a possibility. He'd reached that point 3 days ago. The kitchen window was lit up yellow through the gap in the workshop doors. He set down the plank and went inside. Chum. It was a Tuesday evening in the 6th week that everything shifted into territory he hadn't prepared himself for. Lily had gone to bed. Victoria was in the living room doing something on her laptop, and Ethan came in from the kitchen and sat on the other end of the couch, without thinking much about it. He'd been doing that, he'd noticed, sitting in proximity to her in the evenings, without any particular reason except that it was where he ended up. She closed the laptop. Can I tell you something? She said. Yeah. She looked at the middle distance for a moment, assembling the words with the care she gave to things that mattered. I had a meeting this morning, virtually, with my board. Okay. They want me to come back, full capacity. There's a situation in the Singapore office that they want me involved in directly. She paused. Since the Hale Group went public 4 years ago, I've been stepping back incrementally, handing things to the executive team. It's been the plan, but situations arise. He waited. The point is, I have somewhere I could be, she said. I have a reason to be there, and I've been trying to figure out. She stopped, started again, and this time her voice was slightly different, stripped of the professional texture. I like being here, Ethan. I didn't expect to like it this much. I don't know what to do with that. He was quiet for a moment. Outside, something moved in the oak tree. Probably a squirrel, probably just the night wind. What do you want to do with it? He asked. I don't know. Her hands were in her lap, and she was looking at them with the particular focused attention of someone trying not to look somewhere else. I know what's practical. I know what makes sense. I've been making sense my whole life. And? She looked up at him. Her eyes were steady, as always, but the steadiness now looked like effort. And I'm 53 years old, and I came here in the rain because something in me knew I needed to be somewhere that felt like. She searched for the word. Somewhere real. And this is real. Your kid and your boat and your junk drawer and your Tuesday evenings. This is real. He didn't say anything for a moment. He was being careful in his own way because he knew himself, and he knew that he was not in a position to be careless here. I know what this looks like, she said. A woman in a crisis, landing somewhere comfortable. I know that's what it looks like. That's not what it looks like, he said. Ethan, Victoria. He turned to face her properly. I'm not going to tell you what you feel or what it means, but I'll tell you what it looks like from here. It looks like someone who spent 40 years being exactly what every situation required, and then one night she got in a car and drove somewhere she didn't have to be anything. And she's been slowly figuring out that she's still a person under all the rest of it. He paused. That's not a crisis. That's late. But it's not a crisis. She looked at him for a long time. You're not what I expected, she said, finally. When Claire first brought you home, I thought, he seems fine, decent man, a little too quiet. I thought you probably didn't have much going on internally. And now? Now I think you have too much going on internally, and you've just decided not to advertise it. He looked at her. Is that a criticism? No, she said softly. No, it's not. They sat there on the couch, not touching, the space between them filled with something that neither of them named because naming it felt like rushing toward something they both needed to approach slowly. After a while, she opened her laptop again, and he picked up the book he'd left on the coffee table, and they sat there in the quiet together, which was not nothing, which was, in some ways, Ethan was only beginning to recognize the most intimate thing that two careful people can do, occupy the same silence, with everything unsaid between them like a boat in pieces, waiting to see what it was going to become. The Singapore situation resolved itself without Victoria, which she said she'd expected but hadn't allowed herself to believe. She told Ethan this on a Wednesday morning while he was making Lily's lunch. Peanut butter and honey, cut diagonally because Lily had recently decided that rectangles were unacceptable. And Victoria was standing at the counter with her second cup of coffee, reading something on her phone with the expression she got when news was complicated. They handled it, she said. Good. Marcus, my COO, he's been with me 18 years. He knows how I think. She set her phone face down on the counter. I've been waiting for years for the company to not need me in the room for every decision. And now it doesn't, and I find myself. She paused. Not sure what to do with that, Ethan said. Not sure what to do with that, she confirmed. He pressed the sandwich halves together, cut them, put them in the container. What did you think you'd do when you stepped back? Travel. Write something, possibly. I had a half-finished idea about a book on organizational structure that my editor has been patient about for 3 years. She picked up her coffee. Spend time with Claire. A small pause on the last one. He didn't comment on that, just snapped the lid on the lunch container and put it in Lily's bag. What actually sounds good to you? He asked. Not what you planned. What actually sounds good? She looked at him over the rim of her cup. This, she said, and then seemed to surprise herself slightly by having said it. She looked away, toward the window. Which is a ridiculous answer. Why is it ridiculous? Because this is your life, not mine. He picked up Lily's bag and hung it by the door. Nobody said it had to be one or the other. He called up the stairs for Lily and didn't look back at Victoria, which he did on purpose. Some things needed space to exist in before you started looking at them directly. Lily thundered down the stairs in her sneakers, grabbed her bag, kissed Ethan on the arm because she was not quite tall enough for his cheek, and then turned to Victoria with a very serious expression. "Today is show and tell," she announced. "What are you showing?" Victoria asked. Lily held up a small, smooth gray river stone. "This. I found it in the yard. It's special." Victoria looked at it with appropriate gravity. "What makes it special?" Lily considered this. "It's mine," she said finally, and went out the door. Victoria watched her go. Ethan watched Victoria watch her go, and the expression on Victoria's face in that moment was the kind of thing you don't manufacture. Soft and complicated, like someone being reminded of something they'd put in a box a long time ago. "Go on," Ethan said. "Say it." She turned. "Say what?" "Whatever you were thinking just then." She was quiet for a moment. "I was thinking that I missed most of this," she said. "With Claire. I was building the company when she was that age. I was there. I was physically present more than most women in my position, but I was also always somewhere else in my head, always thinking about the next problem." She picked up her phone from the counter, turned it over in her hand without looking at it. "She grew up, and I'm not entirely sure I watched it happen." "She turned out okay," Ethan said. "She turned out her own person," Victoria said, which was not quite agreement, which is what they're supposed to do. But I wonder sometimes whether I gave her enough to push against, or whether I was too absent to even be worth pushing against, and she just launched herself in whatever direction felt like a way. He thought about that. About Claire at 26, when he'd met her, that particular quality she had of moving fast and decisively, and always slightly away from wherever she'd just been. He'd found it exciting at first. Later he'd recognized it for what it was, not momentum, but flight. "You can't retroactive it," he said. "You can only figure out what you want now." She looked at him. "When did you get wise?" "I've always been wise. You said yourself you underestimated me." She made a sound that was almost a laugh. "I said I misjudged you. Wisdom is a higher bar." He picked up his keys. "I'll be in the workshop. There's leftover soup in the fridge." He left her in the kitchen with her coffee and her phone and the complicated quiet of a woman figuring out what she actually wanted, which was, he thought, probably harder work than anything she'd done in Singapore. The weeks had stopped announcing themselves. He'd lost count somewhere around the 7th or 8th. Not because time had blurred, but because counting had started to feel like anticipating an end, and he'd stopped wanting to anticipate that. The Chris-craft was coming along. The planking on the starboard side was done. The new mahogany fitted tight and caulked, and he'd started the first coat of sealant on the interior. The wood had a smell when you treated it right. Not chemical, something older, something that reminded him of the first time his grandfather had taken him out on the water, in a boat, not unlike this one. When Ethan was about 7, and the world was comprehensible in the way it stops being later. He was sanding the transom one afternoon when he heard footsteps on the flagstone path, and Victoria appeared in the workshop doorway. She did this sometimes now, just appeared, not asking permission, not announcing herself, just showing up in the space he occupied and watching for a while without making a thing of it. She was wearing jeans today. He'd noticed the transition over the past few weeks. Fewer silk blouses, more cotton. The heels she'd arrived in were somewhere in the guest room. She wore flat canvas shoes now, or sometimes no shoes at all in the house. He hadn't said anything about it. It wasn't his business, the slow unbuttoning of whatever armor she'd carried in with her. But he noticed. "What are you doing?" she asked. "Sanding," he demonstrated. "Can I try?" He looked at her. She looked back at him with the particular directness she used when she was genuinely curious and not performing curiosity. He handed her the sanding block. "Grain," he said, pointing at the wood. "Always with the grain. You feel the direction in the wood itself if you pay attention." She crouched beside the transom and ran the block along it, experimentally. Then again, with more confidence. She had good hands. He'd noticed that before, the way she used them when she thought. The particular economy of gesture. She wasn't tentative with the sanding. She felt for it and then committed. "Like that?" she said. "Little more pressure." She adjusted. The sound changed, that right, clean sound of wood being worked correctly. He watched her settle into it, the focus that came over her face when she was learning something, the way she compressed slightly and went quiet and attended to the thing in front of her. "You're good at learning things," he said. She glanced up. "I've had to be. When you start from nothing, you either learn fast or you don't make it." "You started from nothing?" "My parents had a hardware store in Macon." She kept sanding, eyes back on the wood. "We weren't poor exactly, but we weren't. There was no inheritance, no network. I got a scholarship to Georgia State, worked nights, got into business school the second time I applied because I couldn't afford the application fee the first year." She paused. "I built everything from the ground up. So yes, learning fast was survival." "Your daughter doesn't know that story," Ethan said. It wasn't a question. Victoria stopped sanding. "Why do you say that?" "Because if she knew it, she'd have mentioned it. She used to talk about you in a way that made it sound like you'd always been, like the company was always there, like the money was always there." Victoria handed the sanding block back to him. She sat on the low workbench along the wall, the one he used for smaller parts. "I didn't tell her much about the early years," she said. "I wanted her to have a different reference point. I wanted her to know that security was possible." She paused. "Maybe I overcorrected. Maybe I gave her too much certainty and not enough story." "Kids need the story," Ethan said. "They need to know things were hard and you got through them anyway. Otherwise, they don't have a framework for when things get hard for them." Victoria looked at him carefully. "Is that what you're going to do? With Lily? Tell her the hard things?" "Already started," he said. "She knows her mom isn't here the way other moms are. She knows we don't have a lot of money some months. She knows her dad has to work to make things that people want to pay for, and that it doesn't always happen fast." He ran the sanding block along the transom again. "I don't tell her everything. She's 5. But I don't pretend either." "She's very grounded," Victoria said. "For 5. She's the most grounded 5-year-old I've ever encountered." "You haven't encountered that many." "Fair, but still." He worked the sanding block in smooth strokes. "She's going to be fine," he said. "She's already a better person than most adults I know." "She gets that from you." He looked up. Victoria met his eyes without flinching. "She does," she said. "I'm not flattering you. I'm telling you what I see." He looked back at the wood. His neck was warm, which annoyed him slightly because he was 42 years old and had no business being undone by a compliment. "Go back inside," he said. "You're distracting me." She stood, brushing sawdust from her jeans. He heard her walk back up the flagstone path, and he kept sanding until the sound of her footsteps was gone, and then kept going for a while after that, just to make sure he had his bearings. It was Lily who said it first, which was probably inevitable given that Lily had inherited Ethan's honesty without having yet developed his instinct for discretion. She said it on a Sunday evening at dinner, between bites of the pasta Victoria had made. She had been systematically working through the pantry in a way that produced reliably better results than Ethan managed with the same ingredients, which he found both useful and faintly humbling. "Are you going to live here forever?" Lily asked Victoria. Victoria looked up from her bowl. Because you could," Lily said, with the matter-of-fact generosity of someone who hasn't yet learned that these things are complicated. "We have enough room, and you make good pasta. And Daddy is nicer now." A silence. Ethan looked at his pasta. "Nicer than what?" Victoria asked carefully. "Before," Lily said. "Before you came, he was—" She searched for the word, spoon in hand. "Quiet, but not the good kind of quiet. The kind where you're sad, but you're trying not to be." The kitchen was very still. Ethan looked at his daughter, this small person who had just said, with complete unintentional precision, the thing he'd spent 3 years trying to manage around. He didn't have a response. He looked at Victoria, who was looking at Lily with an expression that was doing several things at once. "I'm glad I came," Victoria said. Her voice was steady, but it had that quality it sometimes got in the evenings on the porch. Stripped back, no professional varnish on it. "I'm very glad I came, Lily." Lily seemed satisfied with this and returned to her pasta. Ethan got up to refill his water glass at the sink and stood there for a moment with his back to both of them, looking out the dark window at the yard, at the workshop where the boat waited, at the oak tree doing nothing particularly meaningful. He told himself for weeks that he was being careful, that he was maintaining a reasonable, respectful distance from a situation that was fragile and complicated, from a woman who was in a period of transition and didn't need him projecting things onto her. He told himself he was being a decent person, offering shelter to someone who needed it, and nothing more than that. Lily had just solved for X in about 9 seconds. He turned back to the table, refilled Lily's water too without being asked, and sat back down. "There's ice cream," he said, "if anyone wants." "I want," said Lily. "Obviously," said Ethan. Victoria looked at him across the table. He looked back at her. Neither of them said anything, but something passed between them in that look. Not words, not yet. An acknowledgement. A recognition that the careful, managed distance he'd been maintaining had started collapsing around the edges, and they were both standing there watching it happen, and neither of them was moving to repair it. He got up and got the ice cream. The morning everything almost broke was a Thursday in the 7th week, and it arrived the way bad things tend to. In the middle of something ordinary, without warning. Ethan was in the workshop. Lily was at school. Victoria was at the kitchen table on a conference call, her voice faintly audible through the back window, that controlled professional cadence she shifted into for business, almost a different register than her evening voice. He was fitting a new piece of brass hardware to the bow cleat when he heard the front door. He didn't hear it himself. He was in the workshop, too far. But he heard, a minute later, voices. Then a voice. Raised. He set down the cleat and walked up the flagstone path to the back door, came through the kitchen. Victoria's laptop was open, call still running, she wasn't at the table, and heard it clearly now from the front of the house. Claire's voice. He walked to the front hallway. Claire Mercer was standing in his entry hall, and she was furious in the specific way she went furious, very controlled on the surface, clipped and precise, but with something underneath it that had teeth. She was wearing the kind of clothes she wore when she was making a statement. Sharp blazer, heels, the whole presentation of a woman who came prepared. Her hair was perfect. Her jaw was set. Victoria stood across from her, very straight, very still. The way she stood on Ethan's porch the first night, everything held together by posture. They both looked at Ethan when he appeared. "Ethan," Claire said, "I'd like to talk to you." "It looks like you're already talking," he said. Her eyes went back to Victoria. "I want to understand what is happening in this house." "I'm staying here," Victoria said. Her voice was flat, controlled. "You're staying—" Claire stopped, started again. "Mother, this is my ex-husband's house." "I'm aware of that." "You don't see a problem with that?" "I see a roof over my head," Victoria said, "which your house no longer was. I asked you to give me space. You gave me 2 days," Victoria said. The flatness had a harder edge now. "You didn't ask. You told me I had 48 hours. That's not a request for space, Claire. That's an eviction." Something flickered across Claire's face. Not guilt exactly, but something adjacent to it. She'd not expected her mother to use that word. She recovered quickly. She always recovered quickly. "This is inappropriate," Claire said. She turned to Ethan. "You have to see how this looks." "How does it look?" he said. "Like," she gestured, a short, sharp movement. "Like something is going on, like you two are—" "Are what?" Victoria asked. Claire looked at her mother with an expression that had real pain underneath the anger, which Ethan recognized because he'd seen it before, in different circumstances. "You always do this," she said. "You insert yourself. You find the thing that should be mine, and you make it about you." "Your ex-husband isn't yours anymore," Victoria said carefully. "You ended that marriage. And you moved into his house. I needed somewhere to go. He offered. Why here?" Claire's voice cracked slightly on the last word, and that was where the real question was. Not the accusation about appearances, not the indignation about property or boundaries or social convention. The real question was the one underneath all of it. Why here? Why him? Why does she keep choosing things that feel like they should be mine? The hallway was very quiet for a moment. Ethan said, "Claire." She looked at him. "You left," he said. It wasn't an accusation. He kept his voice even. "You left this house, this family. You made that choice, and I'm not—" I don't have any anger about it anymore. But you left. And what happens in this house after that isn't something you get to have feelings about. She's my mother. And she needed somewhere to be. And I had space. He paused. That's all this is. You can decide what you want to make of it, but that's all it is. He didn't know if that was fully true. He was pretty sure it wasn't fully true, standing there saying it. But it was true enough for this conversation, for this hallway, for the specific thing Claire was doing, which was using the nuclear option of injured dignity to regain control of a situation she'd lost control of by her own choices. Claire looked between them. Something in her face shifted, the presentation cracking slightly, just for a second, showing the younger, less composed version of herself underneath, the version that was actually hurt, not just performing hurt. I came to see if Lily was okay, she said. Her voice was quieter now. Lily's at school, Ethan said. She's fine. She's always fine. Is she? Claire hesitated. Does she know who? She knows Victoria, he said. She calls her Tori. Something passed over Claire's face that he couldn't read and didn't try to. She picked up the bag she'd apparently put down at some point, squared her shoulders, and looked at her mother. I'd like you to call me, she said, when you're ready. I'll call when there's something to say, Victoria said. Claire left. The door closed behind her. The front hallway was very quiet. Ethan could hear the conference call still running faintly from the laptop in the kitchen, someone speaking on a line that no one was listening to anymore. He looked at Victoria. She was still standing straight, but the straightness had a different quality now. Less composure, more cost. She was looking at the door. Are you all right? He said. No, she said, and left it there, honest and spare. He nodded. Okay. He went and closed the laptop, refilled the kettle. He heard her come into the kitchen and sit at the table, and he didn't look at her and didn't say anything and started making tea, and she let him, which was its own kind of answer about how much it had taken out of her. He set the mug in front of her and sat down across the table. She wrapped both hands around it. She's not wrong about everything, Victoria said. What she said about me. Inserting myself, finding things that should belong to other people. She stared into the mug. I have done that, not intentionally, but I have. This isn't that, Ethan said. How do you know? Because you're not trying to take anything, he said. You're just here. She looked up at him. Her eyes were wet at the corners, which was the first time he'd seen that, and he could tell from the slight tension around her mouth that she was aware of it and not happy about it. I don't want to be the reason she's angrier, Victoria said. Claire, whatever she's already carrying, I don't want to add to it. What Claire carries, she chose to pick up, he said. You're not responsible for all of it. I'm responsible for some of it. Yeah, he said. Probably, but not this part. She held the mug with both hands and didn't say anything for a while. The afternoon light came through the kitchen window and laid itself across the table between them. Somewhere down the block, a lawnmower started up and ran for a while and stopped. I thought about leaving, she said. Last night, I lay there and thought about calling the Atlanta apartment and getting it ready and being reasonable about all of this. And then Lily knocked on my door at 2 a.m. because she had a dream about something. A dog, I think, or possibly a very large rabbit. I wasn't fully awake. And she climbed up next to me and went back to sleep in about 3 minutes, and I lay there in the dark thinking that I couldn't remember the last time I'd felt. She stopped. Safe, he offered. She looked at him. The word landed differently than he'd expected it to. Not like a comfort, like a diagnosis, like she'd been waiting for someone to say the exact right word so she could finally stop arguing with herself about it. Safe, she said softly. Yes. He reached across the table and put his hand over hers on the mug. Not a long gesture. Just a moment, pressure and warmth, and then he took it back. But she felt it. He could see that she felt it. Outside, the lawnmower started up again. She looked down at her tea. He looked at the window. And they sat there in the afternoon quiet of a house that was, slowly and irrevocably, and without anyone having exactly planned it, becoming something that belonged to both of them. She didn't leave. Ethan had half expected her to, not because of anything Claire had said specifically, but because of what it had cost Victoria to stay in that kitchen afterward. Drinking tea she didn't taste, holding herself together with the particular dignity of someone who has been seen in a way they weren't prepared for. He'd watched her, carefully and without making it obvious, for the rest of that afternoon and into the evening, watching for the signs, the incremental withdrawal, the emotional packing up, the way people start to absent themselves from a place before they physically go. The signs never came. Instead, she made dinner. She stood at the stove and made a simple tomato soup from scratch, which he hadn't known you could do without a can, and she let Lily help stir even though Lily's stirring technique was enthusiastic enough to require close supervision, and she didn't mention Claire once. Not at dinner, not during Lily's bath, not during the 45 minutes they sat on the back porch after Lily was asleep with the temperature finally dropping to something bearable. She talked about the book she'd been not writing for 3 years, the one her editor kept asking about. She said she'd opened the document that afternoon for the first time in 8 months, and read the 47 pages she'd managed to produce and thought they were mostly usable. "What changed?" Ethan asked. She thought about it. "I think I've been trying to write it from the position of someone who has answers," she said. "As a kind of, here's what I figured out, here's the system, here's the map, and I don't actually have that. I have what worked for me, specifically, in specific circumstances, and the reasons it worked are more complicated and more personal than I wanted to admit in a book I thought was about organizational strategy." "So what's it actually about?" She looked at the workshop. "I think it's about what it costs. Building something from nothing. What it costs, and who pays, and whether it was worth it. And sitting with the fact that the answer is yes and no simultaneously, and not trying to resolve that into something cleaner." "That's a harder book," he said. "Yes." She pulled her knees up to her chest, another thing she'd started doing, a loosening of the careful, composed way she used to occupy a chair. "It's the true one, though." He didn't say anything for a moment, just let that sit there in the warm night air. Then, "Write the true one." She turned her head to look at him. In the porch light, her expression was open in a way he'd gotten used to seeing in the evenings and had never quite gotten over. "You think that's wise? Financially, a business strategy book has a much clearer market." "I don't know anything about book markets," he said, "but I know when someone's describing work they actually want to do versus work they think they're supposed to do. You described the second book like a problem you were solving. You described the first one like something you needed." She was quiet. An owl called somewhere in the direction of the river, that low, repeated sound that carried a long way on still nights in Savannah. "Do you always pay this much attention to people?" she said. "No," he said. "Just the ones worth paying attention to." She looked away again toward the yard, and he looked away too, because that was where they'd landed. This careful, mutual looking away that was its own form of acknowledgement. The understanding that if either of them looked directly at what was happening between them for too long, something would be required of them that neither of them was quite ready to give. He was starting to think, though, that the readiness was coming, that it was building the way pressure builds slowly and without drama until it simply is. The following week, Ethan's brother called. Kyle Mercer had a voice like a man who had spent 20 years in conference rooms being right about things, which was exactly what he was. He was 3 years older than Ethan, lived in Atlanta, played golf on weekends, and had been married to the same woman since they were both 26 and seemed genuinely satisfied with the life he'd built, which Ethan respected without particularly envying. He called on a Tuesday afternoon while Ethan was in the workshop, and Ethan answered with paint-stained hands and the phone propped on his shoulder. "I heard something," Kyle said by way of greeting. "From who?" "Claire. She called Diane last week." Diane was Kyle's wife. Claire and Diane had stayed loosely in touch after the divorce, which Ethan thought was fine. People did that. "She said your ex-mother-in-law is living with you." "She's staying here," Ethan said. "There's a difference." "Ethan?" "What?" "That's..." Kyle paused in the way he paused when he was selecting words. "That's a complicated situation." "Most situations are complicated," Ethan said. "You want to tell me something specific, or are we just acknowledging complexity?" "I want to ask what you're thinking." "I'm thinking I'm fixing a boat and someone needed a place to stay and I had one." "What are you thinking?" Another pause. "She's worth what? 4 billion? 5. You know what people are going to say." "I know what people are going to say," Ethan said. He thought about this. In the honest way, he tried to think about things that made him uncomfortable. I don't particularly care. You should care a little, for Lily's sake. People talk. People talk when there's nothing happening, Ethan said. People talked when Claire left. They talked when I started doing restorations full-time instead of getting a real job. People talk, Kyle. I can't manage what people decide to make of my life from a distance. Kyle was quiet for a moment. Is there something there? Between you two? Ethan set down the brush he'd been holding. I don't know, he said. Which was honest. Which was more honest than most things he'd said out loud about it. That's not a no, Kyle said. No, Ethan agreed. It's not. Kyle exhaled. Not with judgment, exactly. His brother wasn't a judgmental man, not genuinely, more with the exhaustion of someone who cares about you and finds your life consistently more complicated than his own. Just be careful, he said. You've got Lily to think about. I always think about Lily, Ethan said. She's the main thing I think about. I know you do. A pause. How is she actually? Happy, Ethan said, and because it was his brother, happier than she's been in a while. Kyle didn't say anything to that for a moment. Okay, he said finally. Okay, I'll tell Diane you're fine. Tell Diane I'm fine. He hung up and stood there for a minute with the phone in his hand, looking at the hull of the Chris Craft. The first coat of varnish was on, amber and deep, the wood coming back to something like its original intention. He thought about what he'd told Kyle, I don't know, and examined it for honesty and decided it wasn't quite honest anymore, and that he'd said it because it was easier than saying the thing that was actually true, which was that he was falling for someone he had about 15 good reasons not to fall for, and he was doing it anyway, gradually and with full awareness, the way you walk into cold water, slowly and then all at once. He went back to varnishing. The thing no one tells you about living with someone, truly living with them, sharing the dailiness of a house, is how much of a person you learn in the unguarded moments. Not the conversations, not the deliberate exchanges, but the small, unrehearsed things. The way they move through a space when they think no one's watching, the sounds they make when something frustrates them. The things they do with their hands when they're thinking. Ethan learned Victoria in these moments, piece by piece, without meaning to catalog them. He learned that she woke up early, earlier than him, earlier than Lily, sometimes before 6, and that she spent the first 30 minutes of the day sitting at the kitchen table with coffee and absolute silence. Not her phone, not her laptop, just the coffee and the quiet, like she was doing maintenance on herself before the rest of the day began. He'd stumbled into this once in the first week and apologized for interrupting, and she'd said, "You're not interrupting." And he'd gotten his own coffee and sat across from her, and they'd been quiet together for 20 minutes, which was, he thought afterward, one of the better 20 minutes he'd had in recent memory. He learned that she had a slight tremor in her left hand when she was anxious, barely visible. Just a faint unsteadiness she controlled by keeping the hand occupied, setting it flat on a surface, wrapping it around something. He'd noticed it during Claire's visit. He'd noticed it once or twice on calls when something wasn't going the way she expected. He never mentioned it. It wasn't his to mention. He learned that she sang, quietly and apparently unconsciously, while she cooked. Not real singing, just the soft, half-voiced humming of someone who doesn't know they're doing it. It was such a private thing, so completely unguarded, that the first time he heard it from the hallway, he stopped walking and stood there for a moment, listening, feeling obscurely that he'd been handed something she hadn't meant to give him and wasn't sure what to do with it. He learned that she was terrible at doing nothing. On the evenings when there was no call to take and no book to work on, and Lily was entertained and the house was simply quiet and available, she didn't quite know how to be in it without a purpose. She'd stand in doorways, pick things up and set them down, read 2 pages of something and close it. He recognized this. He'd been the same, in the worst period after Claire left, that inability to simply exist in the space of your own life without filling it with something that justified the time. One evening, he handed her a piece of sandpaper and said, "Workshop, you can work on the interior trim." She looked at him. "I was fine." "You were about to reorganize my bookshelf. It needs it." "Workshop," he said. She followed him out. She was actually good at the detail work, which didn't surprise him once he thought about it. She had patience for things that required patience: negotiations, long-term planning, waiting out a situation until the right moment. She applied that same quality to the small pieces of interior trim, working slowly and carefully along the grain, asking questions when she wasn't sure, not asking questions when she was. They worked in companionable quiet most of the time, passing tools back and forth, the radio on low to a station that played old stuff. Not oldies station old, but genuinely old 1940s and 50s, jazz and big band, which was what the previous owner had it set to when Ethan bought the radio at an estate sale, and he'd never changed it because he liked it and kept forgetting. "My father had a record player," Victoria said one evening, sanding the edge of a small mahogany strip. "This was his kind of music." "Hardware store in Macon," Ethan said. "He played big band records in a hardware store?" "On Saturday afternoons," she smiled at the wood. "It was his store. He could do what he wanted." "What was he like?" "Tall," she said, "which I got. Stubborn, which I definitely got. He had this—" She paused, searching for the right word. "He had this absolute confidence in people's basic decency. He thought, fundamentally, that most people were trying their best, and that if you treated them accordingly, they'd usually prove you right." She paused again. "He was wrong sometimes. People disappointed him, but he never quite stopped believing it." "You don't believe it," Ethan said, "not as a criticism." "I believe in people's capacity for decency," she said. "I'm not sure I believe it's the default." She glanced at him. "You're closer to him than I am, in that particular thing. I've been disappointed plenty." "I know, but you keep—" She tilted her head slightly, like she was looking at something from a better angle. "You keep leaving the door unlocked, figuratively. You keep operating from the assumption that the next person through it is going to be okay." He thought about the night she showed up, the rain, the peephole, the way he'd opened the door without asking many questions. "Maybe," he said. "It's not a criticism," she said. "It's the opposite." He looked at her. She was looking back at him, and the light in the workshop was what it always was, just the one work light, not flattering, practical. She was holding a piece of sanding paper and had a faint streak of sawdust on her forearm, and she looked, he thought, more like herself in this moment than in any photograph he'd ever seen of her, more than the woman who had arrived in the rain in the perfectly maintained composure of her expensive coat. He looked back at the piece he was working on. "My father would have liked you," she said. He didn't answer right away, just worked the piece in his hands, feeling for the right smoothness. "Yeah?" he said finally. "He had a thing about people who were good at what they did," she said. "Not successful, necessarily. Good. He thought there was a difference, and that the difference mattered." "There's a difference," Ethan agreed. "He would have spent about 2 hours in this workshop asking you questions, and then gone home and told my mother you were the real thing." She set down her sandpaper and stretched her back in the way she did when she'd been bent over the detail work too long. "She would have wanted to know if you were single." He laughed, a real one, short and surprised. "And you'd have been mortified." "Absolutely. She had no filter whatsoever." She said it with a warmth that had grief underneath it, the particular warmth of someone describing someone they can't get back. She would have loved Lily. She would have been obsessed with that kid. "What was her name?" "Irene." She picked up the sandpaper again, looked at it without working it. "She died 6 weeks after my father. They were married 41 years. The doctor said it was her heart. I think she didn't want to be there without him." The workshop was quiet. The radio played something slow and distant. "I'm sorry," Ethan said. 12 years ago," she said. What she always said. And then, what she didn't usually add. "Sometimes I still pick up my phone to call her. When something happens. Good or bad." She set the sandpaper down again. "The good things are worse, actually. There's nobody who cares about the good things the way your mother does." He understood that. He thought about calling his own father after Lily was born. The conversation they'd actually had, and the one he'd wanted to have running parallel to it in his head, and nodded without saying so. "You have her," Victoria said. "Lily, when good things happen to her." Yeah, he said. I do. She looked at him. Something crossed her face, not sadness, not quite. Something more like recognition, like she'd just understood something that had been forming for a while. I need to tell you something, she said. He set down what he was working on. I didn't come here because I had no options, she said. Her voice was even but careful, the way you speak when you've decided to say a thing you've been not saying for a while. That first night, I told you I didn't want to go to a hotel. That was true. But I had options. I had the Atlanta apartment. I had Margaret, my attorney. She's offered her guest suite genuinely, not just politely. I had a board member in Savannah who would have had something arranged inside of 2 hours. She paused. I drove. And I found myself here. And I told myself it was because I was already driving this direction, and it was late, and you were a reasonable option. He waited. That was a lie I was telling myself, she said. I came here because I wanted to come here. I don't entirely know what that means or what I expected to happen, but I want you to know that I wasn't in so much crisis that I had no choice. I chose this. I chose you. Specifically. The word you landed differently than anything else in the sentence. He felt it land. He looked at her across the workshop, the piece of hull between them, the old radio playing something neither of them was listening to. She was holding the sandpaper in her lap and not looking away from him, which he knew was a thing that cost her because looking away was easier, and she almost never did the easier thing when the harder one was more honest. He said, I know. She blinked. You know? I figured it out around week 3, he said. You're not a woman who runs out of options. You're a woman who makes choices and then doesn't always admit it to herself right away. He paused. I didn't say anything because it wasn't mine to say. She stared at him for a moment. That's... She stopped. Started again. You could have said something. And then what? She opened her mouth and closed it. You needed to get there yourself, he said. It wouldn't have meant anything coming from me. It needed to be yours. He picked up the piece he'd been working on, turned it in his hands. Now it is. She looked at him for a long time. The way she looked at things, she was trying to fully understand with that focused lateral attention, as if approaching from the side was more honest than head-on. Ethan, she said. Victoria, he said. She put the sandpaper down on the workbench and stood up. She walked around the hull section between them, and she stopped in front of him, close enough that he could see the specific dark of her eyes and the fine tension around her mouth that meant she was holding something together that wanted to come apart. He set the piece he was holding down on the bench behind him. She reached up and put her hand against his jaw, just her palm, flat and warm, and held it there for a moment. He didn't move. He let it be what it was, this careful, deliberate thing she was doing, and felt his whole chest tighten with the simple and overwhelming fact of being touched by someone who meant it. I don't know how to do this, she said. Quietly. Not distressed, just honest. I know how to build things. I know how to run things. I don't know how to do this. Neither do I, he said. I haven't done this in a long time. That's not particularly reassuring. No, he said. But it's true. She lowered her hand. He caught it before she took it back, not holding it, just covering it briefly with his own. 1 second. An answer to a question neither of them had asked out loud. Then she stepped back and he let her, and she picked up her sandpaper. Show me how to do the corner piece, she said. Her voice had the faintest unsteadiness to it, which she was pretending wasn't there, which he was pretending not to notice. He showed her how to do the corner piece. They worked for another hour, and the radio played, and the night settled in around the workshop, and neither of them said anything else about it, because they didn't need to. The saying was done. Everything else was just time. 3 days later, Claire called. Not Ethan. Victoria. Victoria told him about it that evening, not immediately. She sat with it for a few hours first, which he understood, and then found him in the workshop and sat on the workbench and said, She called me. And? She apologized. Victoria looked at her hands. Not for the eviction. She didn't go that far. But she apologized for showing up here and for the things she said about crossing boundaries. She said she reacted to something she didn't understand instead of asking. That's something, Ethan said. It's something, Victoria agreed. For Claire, it's actually significant. She doesn't... A pause. She doesn't reverse easily. It costs her. Did you accept it? I said I heard her. She looked up. Which is the honest answer? I'm not there yet, but I heard her. He nodded. She asked about Lily, Victoria said. She wants to visit. Not here. She asked if she could take Lily for an afternoon. Ice cream, she said. The park. Ethan thought about this. The instinct was to be wary. He knew Claire's follow-through, knew the gap between intentions and action. But Lily deserved the chance. Lily always deserved the chance. I'll ask Lily, he said, if she wants to. She'll want to, Victoria said. She's more generous than both of us. She's 5, Ethan said. Generosity is easier before you've been let down enough times. Victoria looked at him. You're not going to let her be let down without preparation. I'm going to try, he said. But you can't prepare someone for every specific version of disappointment. You just have to help them develop he searched for the word, the recovery muscle, the ability to come back from it. You have that, she said, that muscle. It's well developed. It's had a workout, he agreed. She almost smiled, then she asked about you too, Claire. What did she ask? She asked if you were happy. Victoria said it carefully, like she was handling something fragile. I said I thought you were, getting there at least. A pause. She said good. She said she meant it. He thought about Claire saying that. He could imagine it. The real version, not the performance version. The moment after the hurt and the anger when the actual feeling showed through. He'd loved Claire once. Genuinely. The ending of that love had been gradual and painful and very quiet, the way the worst endings are, and he'd spent a long time afterward feeling like something had been taken from him before he figured out that what had actually happened was more complicated than that. She hadn't taken anything. She'd just been who she was, and he'd been who he was, and who they were didn't fit together the way they'd both hoped. He hoped she was happy too. He found, examining the feeling honestly, that he meant it. Good, he said. Victoria nodded. She sat on the workbench for a while longer, watching him work, not making conversation, just being in the space the way she'd gotten comfortable doing, the way he'd gotten more than comfortable with, the way that he now registered her absence from a room before he registered most other things. He kept working. The varnish went on in long, even strokes. The boat was almost there now. You could see the whole of it, what it would be, the lines of it clean and definitive, the wood alive again under the treatment. A few more weeks, maybe less, if he pushed. He didn't want to push. He'd been in no particular hurry lately to finish things. That realization sat with him, quiet and not uncomfortable, while the smell of varnish rose in the warm night air, and Victoria sat on his workbench, and the oak tree moved faintly at the edge of the light, and somewhere inside the house, Lily slept with her stone on the nightstand, and her socks still on because she always forgot to take them off. And the whole of it, the whole improbable, complicated, unasked-for entirety of it, felt, for the first time in a very long time, like something he didn't want to finish. Lily went for ice cream with Claire on a Saturday in late July. Ethan drove her to the park on Forsyth, where Claire was already waiting by the fountain, and watched from the car as Lily ran across the grass with her arms out in the way she ran everywhere, full commitment, no breaks. Claire crouched down and caught her, and the hug was genuine. He could see that from 20 yards. Whatever Claire was, whatever the complicated record of her absence and her intentions, and the distance between them, she loved her daughter. He'd never doubted that. He just doubted her consistency, which was a different thing and not his place to adjudicate anymore. He drove home. Victoria was in the kitchen with her laptop and a cup of coffee going cold beside her, which meant she'd been working for a while without noticing the coffee. He set the kettle on and she looked up. How did she look? Victoria asked. Happy, he said. The moment she saw Claire, she was just happy. Victoria nodded, looking back at her screen. Children are forgiving by nature, she said. It's not weakness. It's actually the healthiest possible response when someone you love keeps showing up imperfectly. You just keep letting them try. A pause. We learn not to, eventually. He He made fresh coffee and put it next to her. She noticed and reached for it without looking away from her work. "How's the book?" he asked. "Terrifying," she said. "I wrote something this morning that I'm fairly sure is the most honest thing I've ever put on a page, and now I want to delete it and write something safer." "Don't." "You don't know what it says." "Doesn't matter," he said. "If it scared you to write it, it's probably the thing the book needs." She looked up at him. That look she had, the one that measured him in a way that wasn't critical, just attentive, like she was revising an estimate upward. "My editor said something similar," she said. "Your editor's smart." "She's been waiting 4 years for me to stop being careful." Victoria turned back to her screen, but there was something lighter in her expression now. "Maybe I'll just send her this chapter and see what she says." "Do that." He went out to the workshop. The Chris Craft was at the stage that always felt to him simultaneously closest to done and most likely to go wrong. The final hardware fitting, the reassembly of all the small systems that had to work together in order for the boat to be what it was supposed to be. Engine lines, wiring, the rebuilt original dash. He'd sourced a period-correct steering wheel from a salvage dealer in Florida, which had arrived slightly worse than advertised, and he'd spent 2 evenings cleaning and treating it until it looked right. He worked steadily through the morning, and at some point around 11, he heard the back door open, and Victoria appeared in the workshop doorway with 2 sandwiches and set them on the workbench without ceremony. He thanked her and she went back inside, and he ate while he worked, which he did when he was close to something, when stopping felt like losing the thread. Lily came home at 3 in the afternoon in good spirits, full of ice cream and the specific giddy energy of a child who has been given undivided adult attention for several hours. She told Ethan about the ducks in the park fountain and a dog she'd met named Gerald, and the fact that her mother had let her have 2 scoops plus a topping, which Lily reported as though it were a mildly transgressive act she approved of. "Did you have a good time?" Ethan asked. "Yes," Lily said, already moving toward the backyard. "Tori, I'm back." Victoria was on the porch with her book, and the reunion between her and Lily was brief and characteristically efficient. Lily climbed into the chair beside her, gave her the summary version of the Gerald the dog story, and then asked if they could water the herbs, which they did together while Ethan stood in the kitchen doorway watching the 2 of them move around the small porch garden with the watering can. He thought about what Kyle had said on the phone. "Be careful. You've got Lily to think about." He was thinking about Lily. He thought about Lily constantly, and what he kept arriving at, when he was honest with himself, was that Lily had not needed protecting from Victoria Hale. Lily had thrived. Lily was happier than she'd been in a year, and he was not going to pretend that was unrelated to the woman currently explaining to his daughter why you had to water the basil at the base and not on the leaves. The question wasn't whether Victoria was good for Lily. The question was whether any of this was built on solid enough ground to trust with the weight of a child's attachment. That was the thing he turned over in his head in the workshop, in the evenings, in the early morning when he woke before his alarm. Not whether he felt something. That was settled. Whether it would hold. He had no guarantee of that. Nobody ever did. He'd thought his marriage was built on solid ground, and discovered it wasn't. But he also knew from that same experience the difference between the feeling of something solid and the feeling of something that was performing solidity. He knew what the first one felt like and what the second one felt like, and this was the first one. He'd stake his judgment on that. Whether his judgment was trustworthy was a separate question he tried not to sit with too long. The conversation that changed things happened on a Wednesday. Not the conversation he'd expected. He'd been half anticipating something direct, a continuation of what had started in the workshop, the admission, the hand against his jaw. He'd been waiting for the next step of that thing without quite knowing what form it would take. What actually happened was quieter and more complicated and, in the end, more significant. He came in from the workshop at 6 to find Victoria standing in the kitchen, not cooking, not on her phone, not working, just standing at the counter with her arms crossed and a look on her face that he recognized from the early weeks. That effortful composure, the holding together posture. "What happened?" he said. She looked at him. Marcus called. Marcus, the COO, the one who'd been with her 18 years. "The Singapore thing?" New thing. She exhaled slowly. There's a block on the board. 3 members led by a man named Philip Gerard. He's been a board member for 6 years. Never liked the direction I've been taking the company since we went public. He's been building something quietly, apparently, and Marcus just found out the shape of it. She paused. They want to move me to a non-executive chair role. Ceremonial. My name on the letterhead, no actual operational authority. Ethan was quiet for a moment. Can they do that? With enough votes, yes. I still hold a significant stake, but I gave up majority control when we went public. It was the trade-off. Her jaw tightened. I knew it was a theoretical risk. I didn't think Gerard had the patience or the coalition for it. Do you want to fight it? She looked at him, and the look had something searching in it. That's what Marcus asked. He said he could have a response strategy ready in 48 hours. Legal options, shareholder engagement, the whole campaign. She looked at the counter, at nothing in particular. The company I built, my name is literally on it. I know. And I'm standing here trying to figure out if I care enough to go to war over it. She said it like a confession, which is either wisdom or failure, and I genuinely can't tell which. He didn't answer immediately. He went to the fridge, got 2 beers, opened them, handed her one. She took it. What does fighting it look like? He said. Months of legal and political maneuvering, traveling, being in rooms I've been trying to step back from. Spending energy on defending territory instead of building anything new. She drank. Winning, probably. I have a better coalition than Gerard if I activate it. But it would cost... She stopped, looked at him. It would cost this. The word this hung in the kitchen. He looked at her steadily. You don't get to sacrifice the company for this, Victoria. She frowned. What? You don't get to let Gerard win because you're worried about disrupting what's happening here, he said. That's not a choice I'll let you make. You won't let me. I won't let you, he confirmed evenly. Because in 5 years, if you look back and you gave up something you built from nothing because you were trying to keep things comfortable in Savannah, Georgia, you'll resent it. Maybe not right away, but you will. She stared at him. That's not what I was saying. You said it would cost this, he said. I'm telling you it won't. Whatever this is, it doesn't require you to stop being who you are. It never did. The kitchen was very still. You're telling me to go back, she said. I'm telling you to go handle your business, he said, and then come back. She looked at him for a long moment. He could see the shape of what she was doing, the reassessment, the recalculation. Victoria Hale did not accept things at face value. She interrogated them. He'd learned this about her the same way he'd learned everything else, by watching and paying attention and not rushing her. What if I can't do it the way I used to, she said. What if stepping back wasn't just a plan? What if I've actually changed and going back to that room what if I don't want to be that person anymore? Then you go back and you figure that out from the inside, he said. You don't figure it out by letting someone else take it from you. She set her beer down on the counter, looked at him with an expression he hadn't seen before, raw and tired and slightly undone, like something she'd been carrying had gotten heavier than she'd realized. I'm scared, she said. The words came out simple and unadorned, which was clearly how she'd intended them. I know, he said. I'm not usually... I know that too. She looked at the floor for a moment, then back at him. If I go deal with this, it won't be a few days. It'll be weeks, probably, maybe longer. Okay, he said. Lily will be fine, he said. She was fine before you came. She'll miss you, but she'll be fine. Victoria's expression did something complicated at that. He could see her working through it. The acknowledgement that she had become something to Lily, something that her absence would register as a loss, even a temporary one. That was not nothing. That was, in fact, everything, for a woman who had spent years wondering if she'd failed at the particular work of mattering to the people closest to her. And you? She said. He looked at her. I'll be here, he said. That's not complicated. She crossed the kitchen in 4 steps and put her arms around him, which surprised him enough that he stood still for half a second before his own arms came up around her. She was not a small woman, but she felt, not small, that wasn't the word. She felt like a person, fully and specifically a person, with the particular weight and warmth of someone who had made a decision to stop holding back. He held her. She didn't cry. He hadn't expected her to. She just held on for a long moment and then stepped back, and they looked at each other in the kitchen, where they'd eaten 100 meals by now, where Lily had sorted batteries on the floor, where Claire's arrival had broken the air, and they'd put it back together with tea. "I'll call Marcus," she said. "Good," he said. She picked up her beer and her phone and went to the back porch, and he could hear her voice starting up. The professional register, the boardroom tone, the Victoria Hale who had built something from nothing and wasn't going to let Philip Gerard have it without a fight. He made dinner, pasta, the kind Lily liked, with butter and parmesan and a little too much garlic the way everyone preferred it. He called Lily down, and they ate, and Victoria came in partway through and sat down and ate with them and talked to Lily about Gerald the Duck Park dog because Lily had more Gerald content she hadn't delivered yet. It was normal. It was specifically, deliberately, unambiguously normal. And he was aware, sitting there, that he would want to remember this particular Tuesday evening for a long time. She left 4 days later. Not dramatically. She didn't make it dramatic, because that wasn't her nature. She packed efficiently, one suitcase and the laptop bag and the leather bag she'd arrived with, which she'd been living without for weeks. He noticed she took it out of the guest room closet with a slight pause, like she was deciding something about it. Lily gave her a hug that lasted a long time by Lily's standards. Victoria crouched to her height and said something in her ear that Ethan didn't hear, and Lily nodded with the seriousness she applied to things that mattered. He drove her to the airport. They didn't talk much. He parked in the short-term lot and walked her to the departures entrance, and they stood there on the sidewalk with her bags, the airport's particular indifferent noise around them. "I've never had anyone tell me to go handle my business before," she said. "How's it sitting with you?" "Better than I expected." She adjusted the strap of the laptop bag on her shoulder. "I called Claire last night. We talked for an hour. Good conversation? Productive. Which for us right now is good." She looked at him. "She knows I'm coming back here. After." He registered the after. "What did she say?" "She said..." Victoria paused, something moving across her face. "She said she was sorry she hadn't seen it sooner. What kind of person you were." She met his eyes directly. "I didn't respond to that with anything particularly graceful. I just said I thought she was right." He didn't say anything. Let that sit where it was. "Ethan." Her voice had that quality out, stripped back, no varnish, the evening porch voice. "I have been a person for most of my life who knew exactly what she wanted and went straight at it. No detours. No second guessing. You build the plan and you execute." She shifted her weight slightly. "And then one night I ended up on your porch in the rain and I've been..." She stopped. "I've been the happiest I've been in 10 years. In a house with one working bathroom and a boat in the backyard and a 5-year-old who calls me Tori. 1.5 bathrooms," he said. She looked at him. "The half bath off the laundry room," he said. "It counts." Something broke loose in her then. A laugh, sudden and genuine, that transformed her face the way only a real laugh could. She put her hand briefly on his chest, flat-palmed, the same gesture she'd made in the workshop, and looked at him from underneath it. "I'll be back," she said. "I need you to know that's not something I say without meaning it." "I know that about you," he said. "I've known that about you for a while." She picked up her bag. He stood there while she went through the doors, and then he stood there a moment after, on the sidewalk in the heat, with the sound of the airport all around him and the particular quality of the air that follows a departure. Not empty exactly. Provisional, like a space that's been vacated temporarily and knows it. He drove home. Lily was at a neighbor's, Pam from 3 houses down, who took her occasionally when Ethan needed a few hours. He pulled into the driveway and sat in the car for a minute before going in. The house looked like it always looked from the outside. The paint needing attention on the window trim, the oak tree overhanging the porch, the workshop visible through the side yard with the wide doors he always left open. He went inside. The guest room was tidy. She'd made the bed, folded the extra quilt at the foot of it, left the small lamp on the nightstand the way she'd found it. He stood in the doorway for a moment. The room still had the faint scent of her. Something understated, not perfume exactly, more like the particular smell of a person who had inhabited a space. He left the door open. In the kitchen, the pantry was organized. The list on the fridge had two things in Victoria's handwriting at the bottom that he hadn't put there: good olive oil and basil starts. He looked at the list for a long moment. He left them on the list. The workshop was the same as he'd left it. The Chris Craft sat complete in all but final inspection, every piece in place, the varnish cured to that deep, warm amber, the new mahogany matching the original as well as such a thing could be matched, which was to say, imperfectly and beautifully. He ran his hand along the hull. It was ready. He'd known this morning it was ready, and he'd decided not to think about the timing too much. He started the inspection anyway. She called that evening, video, while he was on the porch. Her hotel room in Atlanta was visible behind her. Impersonal, neat, the kind of room that could be anywhere. "How is it?" he asked. "Quiet," she said. "Differently quiet than your house." "Better or worse?" "Just different." She shifted. She was at the desk, laptop open, reading glasses pushed up on her head. "I met with Marcus for 3 hours. The situation is manageable." Gerard overplayed. He went to 3 board members who came directly to Marcus, which means his coalition is smaller than he projected. A pause. "We can handle this without a full campaign, a few targeted conversations, some shareholder communications, a board meeting in 3 weeks. So not months." "Not months," she confirmed. "Probably 3 to 4 weeks." He nodded. 3 to 4 weeks was 3 to 4 weeks. He was not going to count them the way he'd counted the early weeks of her staying, watching for the number, with a kind of braced anticipation. He was going to do what he always did: work, take care of Lily, tend the things that needed tending. "How's the boat?" she asked. "Done," he said. She looked at him through the screen. "Actually done?" "Actually done. Ready for water." "When are you taking it out?" He looked at the workshop, the dark shape of the boat visible in the open doors. "When you get back," he said. She was quiet for a moment. He could see the thing that moved across her face, not performed emotion, the real kind, the kind you can't entirely control. "Okay," she said softly. "Tell Marcus good luck," Ethan said. "He doesn't need luck," she said. "He's been ready for this for years. I just had to get out of his way long enough for him to prove it." "Maybe that was the point," Ethan said, "of all of it." She looked at him through the screen in a hotel room in Atlanta, 300 miles from his porch. "Maybe," she said. They talked for another 20 minutes about nothing in particular. Lily's ongoing investigation into whether birds could smell, the basil on the porch that needed attention, a thing Victoria had read about mahogany sourcing that she thought he might find interesting, which he did. Normal things. The specific ordinary texture of a conversation between 2 people who have run out of the need to make conversation and can just talk. When they hung up, he sat on the porch in the dark for a while, listening to the crickets, looking at the lit-up shape of the workshop. 3 to 4 weeks. He could work on something new. There was a 1958 Lyman runabout he'd been corresponding with a man in Augusta about, a boat that had been sitting in a barn since the 90s, neglected but structurally sound, the kind of project that would take a full year and come out the other side genuinely beautiful. He'd been on the fence about committing to it. He got his phone and wrote the man in Augusta to say he was interested. Then he put the phone down and looked at the oak tree and thought about nothing and everything simultaneously, the way you do when something has shifted in your life and you're in the strange, provisional aftermath of it. Not resolved, not finished, but differently oriented than you were before. Pointed somewhere. Something solid underfoot. Finally, after a long time of not quite trusting the ground. He sat on the porch until the night got heavy and cool, and then he went inside, checked on Lily, asleep, socks still on, the gray river stone on the nightstand, and went to bed. He slept well for the first time in longer than he could accurately remember. Straight through, no waking, no storms. She was gone for 26 days. Ethan didn't count them as they passed. He'd meant what he said about not doing that. But he knew the number afterward, the way you always know the shape of a period of time once it's over and you can see it from the outside. 26 days. Not 3 to 4 weeks, just short of it, which he only registered because on the 26th day, he was in the workshop replacing a cleat on the Lyman runabout he'd started breaking down, and his phone rang, and it was her. "I'm at the airport," she said. He set down the tool in his hand. "Savannah? Flight lands in 40 minutes. I didn't tell you in advance because I wasn't sure until this morning that it was actually over." A pause. "It's over." "Gerard?" Conceded. 2 of his 3 board members flipped in the room. He made his speech, nobody followed, and he sat down. Her voice had the particular flat quality of someone reporting a thing they'd expended enormous energy on and are now relieved to be done with. "Marcus handled most of it. I mostly showed up and let them see I wasn't going anywhere." "That's the job sometimes," Ethan said. "That's the job sometimes," she agreed. I've been thinking on the plane about a different structure. For my role. Not what Gerard wanted, but not what I've been doing either. Something in between that I actually want." She sounded, under the professional tone, like someone who had figured something out. "Marcus and I have been talking about it. I think it might be the right thing." "Good," he said. "Tell me when you land." He didn't go to the airport. That had not been discussed, and it felt presumptuous, and he was not a presumptuous man. He texted Lily's school that he'd be picking her up at normal time, went back to the Lyman for another hour, and then went inside and made dinner. The chicken with the porch herbs, the one that had started all those weeks ago as a revelation about what food could taste like when someone thought about it. He heard the cab at 6:15. Lily was at the table doing her first grade homework. She'd started first grade 2 weeks ago, which had been a significant event involving a new backpack and strong opinions about pencil cases. She heard the cab too, looked up, looked at her father. "Is it Tori?" she said. "Go look," he said. She was off the chair and at the front door before he could say anything else. He heard the door open, heard Lily's voice go up an octave the way it did when she was fully delighted, heard Victoria's voice underneath it, lower and warm. He stayed in the kitchen. He turned the heat down on the stove. He stood at the counter and let it happen in the front hall without him, because some reunions belong to the people having them and don't need witnesses. When Victoria came into the kitchen, she was carrying her laptop bag, and Lily was attached to her left side with both arms, walking in the inefficient shuffle that resulted from a 6-year-old refusing to let go. She looked at Ethan across the kitchen. He looked at her. "It smells the same," she said. "I made the chicken." "You made the chicken." She set the bag on the chair. Something in her face was tired and settled in a different kind of present than she'd been when she left. Not harder, but more resolved, like someone who had gone somewhere and done a necessary thing and come back without regret about either part of it. Lily was telling her about first grade, specifically about a boy named Marcus, different Marcus, who had taken her eraser and then claimed it was his, and the injustice of this was still active. Victoria listened with appropriate seriousness and appropriate indignation, and Ethan put food on the table, and the 3 of them sat down. It was not remarkable in any external way. A man and a woman and a child eating dinner at a kitchen table in Savannah, Georgia, on a Tuesday in September. From the outside, nothing. From the inside, everything. After Lily was in bed, they sat on the back porch. The September air was different than the summer air had been. Still warm, but with a quality that was starting to let go of the season, a faint loosening, the Spanish moss in the oak tree moving in a way that felt like the beginning of fall, coming from a long way off. He'd brought 2 beers. She'd changed out of her travel clothes into jeans and a loose shirt, and she was barefoot in the chair, feet tucked up, which was a posture she'd developed over the summer and he'd never commented on because it was not the kind of thing you comment on without making it self-conscious. "What did you figure out?" he said. "On the plane. About the role." She looked at the workshop, at the shape of the Lyman visible in the doors. "I want to build things again," she said, "not manage what already exists. The Hale Group it's a mature company. It runs. Marcus can steward it. What I want to do is find the next thing. The early stage stuff. A fund maybe focused on companies at the beginning where there's still something to build." She paused. "Based here." He looked at her. "Here as in Savannah." "Here as in your porch," she said. And then, straight on, the way she said things when she decided to say them. I've been thinking about what here means, whether it's a place or a... She stopped. I bought a house. He waited. 3 weeks ago. I had Marcus's assistant handle the viewing because I couldn't get back, but I know the neighborhood and I've seen enough of the pictures. It's 4 blocks from here, on Abercorn. It needs work. She glanced at him sideways. Not boat-level work, but real work. 4 blocks, he said. I didn't want to be in a hotel, she said. And I didn't want to... She turned to face him properly. I didn't want to presume coming back here, just moving back in. We haven't had a conversation about what this is, and I think we need to. Okay, he said. So, she held her beer in both hands. What is this, Ethan? He looked at her for a moment. He thought about the first night, the rain, the peephole. He thought about the kitchen floor and batteries. He thought about the workshop and sandpaper and the smell of varnish in her hand against his jaw in the evening light. He thought about 26 days and the way the house had its own specific quality of quiet when only he and Lily were in it, a quality he recognized because he'd lived in it for 3 years and had stopped noticing it until it went away. I think you know what this is, he said. I want to hear you say it. He looked at her steadily. I'm in love with you, he said. I've been in love with you since around week 4, which I didn't say because the timing was... It was a lot, and you needed to get to your own answers before I handed you mine. He paused. But that's what this is, on my end. She looked at him for a long moment. Her eyes were steady, as always, but what was behind them now was not the effortful steadiness of someone holding something together. It was something quieter than that, something that had arrived. I've been in love with you since the junk drawer, she said. He looked at her. The morning Lily and I were on the kitchen floor, she said. You came in and you looked at us and you didn't say anything. You just sat down at the table and got your coffee and you just... Let it be what it was. You didn't make a thing of it. You didn't need to. She shook her head slightly. I can't tell you what that felt like, to be in a space where someone just let things be what they were without needing them to be different. He didn't say anything for a moment. The owl was out again somewhere over the river, that sound that carried. The house on Abercorn, he said. Yes. 4 blocks is 4 blocks, he said. That's not here. She looked at him. I'm not saying move in tomorrow, he said. Lily has a rhythm, and she's adjusting to first grade, and there are reasonable ways to do this that don't rush anything. But 4 blocks is... He paused. 4 blocks is for your sake, not hers, not mine. She was quiet for a long moment. I didn't want to presume, she said again. I know, he said. I'm telling you, in this specific case, you have permission to presume. Something broke open in her expression, gently and without drama. She reached over and took his hand, and he let her, and they held on in the ordinary way that 2 people hold on when they've both decided to stop being careful about it. The house on Abercorn turned out to need more work than the pictures suggested, which Victoria reported without apparent distress. She'd known what she was getting into. She hired a contractor for the structural things and spent 2 weekends stripping paint from the original heart pine floors herself, which she did with the same methodical focus she'd applied to the mahogany trim in his workshop, and which Ethan helped with on the second weekend while Lily made a very detailed chalk drawing on the new porch. She didn't move into Ethan's house. She moved into hers. But 4 blocks was 4 blocks. And by October, the rhythm of it had established itself naturally, and without anyone decreeing it. Some evenings at his house, some at hers, Lily spending 2 nights a week on Abercorn, where Victoria had set up a room with a particular attention to the things Lily actually cared about, which were determined by asking Lily directly. The room had good light and a deep window seat and a dedicated spot for the growing collection of river stones, because the one stone had become a collection, as these things do. Kyle came to visit in October. He and Diane drove down for a long weekend, the ostensible reason being to see Lily, which was true, but not the whole truth. Ethan knew his brother. He'd wanted to see the situation with his own eyes. He saw it at dinner the first night. They ate at Ethan's house, all of them. Kyle and Diane, Ethan and Lily, Victoria. Kyle was a good man who had spent 20 years being professionally cautious, and he was visibly recalibrating across the meal. Ethan watched it happen without making it easier for him. Kyle watched Victoria help Lily with a stuck jar lid. He watched Victoria and Ethan disagree, mildly, about whether the Lyman was going to be a 6-month or 8-month project, and disagree the way people disagree when they're comfortable enough to not need to manage the other person's reaction. He watched Lily, at the end of the meal, fall asleep on the couch with her head in Victoria's lap, while Victoria kept eating and talking without interrupting either. Afterward, when the dishes were done, and Diane had taken Lily upstairs, and Victoria had walked home to Abercorn, Kyle stood in the kitchen with his brother and said, "Okay." "Okay what?" Ethan said. "Okay, I was wrong to be worried." He said it like it cost him something, which for Kyle it did. It works. You two, it actually works." "Yes," Ethan said, "it does." "She's not what I expected," Kyle said. "I had a picture in my head, the billionaire, the whole—" He made a gesture. "She's not that." "She's exactly that," Ethan said. "She's also a person who reorganizes junk drawers and makes soup from scratch and talks to a 6-year-old about whether vultures can smell things. People are usually more than the picture." Kyle looked at him. "When did you get philosophical?" "I've always been philosophical. You just weren't listening." His brother laughed, and they finished the dishes, and it was fine. It was simply fine, which was the version of approval Ethan had always been willing to accept from his brother. Not enthusiasm, not a declaration, just the quiet acknowledgement that he was paying attention to the right things. Claire came in November. This was the thing Ethan had been approaching in the back of his mind since Claire's call to Victoria, since the ice cream afternoon with Lily, since the slow and careful détente that had been happening between mother and daughter over months of phone calls. It had been building towards something that would eventually require the same physical space, and November was when it happened. She came for Lily's birthday, which had always been her intention, and which she'd called to confirm 3 weeks early, which itself was progress. She came on a Saturday, and she was on time, which was also progress, and she brought a gift that was specifically and thoughtfully Lily rather than generically child, which suggested she'd been paying attention from whatever distance she'd been paying it from. Victoria was not at Ethan's house when Claire arrived. That had been discussed, not with any drama, just practically. Victoria saying she thought it was better to give Claire the first hour without that particular variable. Ethan had agreed. The first hour went fine. Lily was 6 and fully in possession of her birthday and not particularly preoccupied with subtext. She showed Claire the room updates, the stone collection, the artwork on the refrigerator. Claire sat on the kitchen floor and played a card game she'd brought and lost it completely and genuinely, which Lily found enormously satisfying. Ethan watched his ex-wife on the kitchen floor with their daughter and felt something he hadn't expected to feel. Not residual love, not residual pain, but something closer to clarity. The particular clarity of seeing a person accurately and without the distortion of either attachment or resentment. Claire was who she was. She was doing, right now, in this kitchen, the best version of what she was capable of. That was worth something. It wasn't everything, but it was worth something. Victoria arrived at 2 o'clock. Ethan answered the door, and she looked at him with a question in her eyes, and he nodded slightly. "It's okay. Come in." She came in. The moment in the kitchen was not what he'd feared and not what he'd hoped, which was to say it was real. Claire looked up from the card game. Victoria stood in the doorway. They looked at each other across the kitchen where, 4 months ago, Claire had stood furious, and Victoria had stood very straight, and the air between them had been almost solid with everything unsaid. The air now was just air. "Hi, Mom," Claire said. Her voice was careful. "Hi, sweetheart," Victoria said. Also careful. Lily looked between them with the equanimity of a child who has been raised in proximity to complicated adult feelings and has decided that her birthday is more important. "Tori," she said, "I beat Mom 4 times in a row." "I'm not surprised," Victoria said, coming into the kitchen. "She's been practicing on me all week." Claire's mouth curved. "She has a tell. She squints when she has a good hand." "I do not squint," Lily said, affronted. "You absolutely squint," Ethan said. Lily looked around at the three adults who had apparently conspired against her on her own birthday, decided this was not worth fighting, and began shuffling for another round. Victoria sat at the table. Claire sat across from her. Ethan stood at the counter and made coffee and did not intervene in whatever was going to happen because it was not his to intervene in. What happened was that they talked. Not about the important things. Not first. About Lily. About the stone collection. About the first-grade teacher who had strong opinions about reading groups that Lily was also developing opinions about. About ordinary things. And through the ordinary things, around the edges of them, the other things came through gradually, the way they do when two people who have hurt each other are trying to find the shape of what they're going to be now. Claire said, at one point, while Lily was distracted with the card game, "I know I handled things badly, the way I—" She glanced at Ethan and then back at her mother. "I know it wasn't right." "No," Victoria said. "It wasn't. Not unkindly, just accurately." "I was angry," Claire said, "about a lot of things that had nothing to do with you being in this house." "I know that too," Victoria said. A pause. "Are you happy here?" Claire asked her mother. The question was genuine, said he could hear it, that unguarded quality that Claire had when she stopped performing and just asked. Victoria looked around the kitchen, at the list on the fridge, which still had good olive oil and basil starts in her handwriting, which Ethan had never erased. At the cereal bowl on the counter because Lily still forgot. At Ethan, who was looking at her. "Yes," she said simply. "I'm happy here." Claire nodded slowly. "Then I'm glad," she said, and then quieter. "I mean it." "I know you do," Victoria said. They didn't hug. They weren't there yet, and nobody pretended they were. But when Claire left at 4 o'clock, she hugged Lily for a long time, and she said goodbye to Victoria with something that was closer to warmth than anything that had existed between them in a long time. And she looked at Ethan in the doorway and said, "She's good for you, both of you." And then she got in her car and drove away. Ethan stood in the doorway watching her go and thought that even the broken things sometimes find their way towards something functional. Not whole, not what they were before they broke. Something new and workable, which might be the more honest version of repair anyway. He went back inside. Victoria was helping Lily pick a birthday movie, which was proceeding as all such negotiations proceeded, with Lily having strong opinions and Victoria having patient ones, and the outcome being some version of what Lily wanted, which was as it should be on a birthday. He sat on the couch. Lily climbed over him to get the better blanket position. Victoria sat on the other side of Lily. The movie started. Something animated, something loud with primary colors, the kind of thing that requires no interpretation. He looked sideways, past Lily's head, at Victoria. She was watching the movie with the focused attention she gave to things that didn't require her to perform attentiveness, which meant she was actually watching it. She had a section of blanket. Lily was between them, warm and gradually going heavy the way she went when she was fighting sleep, the birthday finally catching up with her. This was what it looked like. Not the magazine version, not the kind of story that sounds good when you tell it at a dinner party. It looked like a couch, and a movie neither adult would have chosen, and a 6-year-old with her socks still on and leftover birthday cake in the kitchen, and the specific irreplaceable quality of a house where people have chosen to be. There was a morning in April, 7 months after Victoria had come back from Atlanta, when she took Lily to the nursery on the east side of town, and they came home with a sapling in a black plastic pot, about 18 inches tall, that Lily carried very carefully from the car to the backyard with both arms. Ethan was in the workshop. He heard them come in through the back gate. "What is that?" he said, coming out. "A peach tree," Lily announced. "Tori says it'll grow really big." "Eventually," Victoria said. She was carrying a small bag of soil amendment and a pair of gardening gloves that were new, still with the tag on. "It'll take a few years before it fruits, but I want to plant it now." He looked at her. "Where?" She looked around the yard. She'd been thinking about this, he could tell. She had the look she got when she'd already decided something and was now just checking that the physical space matched the internal map. She walked to the back left corner, by the fence, where the oak tree's shadow didn't reach in the afternoon, where the light was good. "Here," she said. He helped dig the hole. Lily helped carry water in the little yellow watering can she'd had since she was 3. They planted the peach tree in the corner of the yard on a warm April morning with the smell of good soil and the sound of the neighborhood waking up around them, and nobody made a speech about what it meant, which was the right call, because the meaning was self-evident to anyone paying attention. Lily patted the soil around the base with both hands, very seriously, and said, "Grow good." "That's the general idea," Victoria said. Ethan stood up, brushed the dirt off his knees, and looked at the two of them crouched by the tree in the morning light. Victoria with her new gardening gloves and her sleeves rolled up and dirt on her forearm. Lily with her socks on, as always, muddy at the toes now. The small sapling between them, doing whatever trees do in the quiet of their beginning. He thought about what it cost sometimes to let something grow, the waiting, the uncertainty of whether it would take, the years between planting and fruit where all you can do is tend it and trust and not pull it up out of impatience to see if it's working. He'd spent a long time after Claire left, believing that the cost of trying again was too high, that he'd built something careful and self-sufficient, and that adding anything to it was a way of creating new surfaces for things to go wrong. He'd told himself this was wisdom. He'd done such a good job of it that he'd started believing it. And then someone knocked on his door in the rain. The thing about that story, the story of Victoria arriving on the porch, is that it sounds, when you describe it, like fate, like the universe arranging itself helpfully. He didn't think it was that. He thought it was simpler and harder and more interesting than that. He thought it was two people who were, each in their own way, ready for something they hadn't admitted to themselves yet. And that readiness had created a small window where the right kind of knock on the right kind of evening could actually be heard. If he hadn't opened the door, she'd have gone to a hotel. She'd said so. Not explicitly, but he understood it. She would not have stood on the porch in the rain indefinitely. She'd knocked because something in her thought it was worth trying, and he'd opened the door because something in him agreed. That's not fate. That's a decision made twice at the same moment by two people standing on either side of a door in the dark. The black leather bag was in the guest room closet. He'd noticed it there in the months after she'd come back, tucked on the high shelf where you put things you're not currently using. She had other bags now. A good canvas tote for the farmer's market she'd started going to on Saturday mornings, a new work bag for the early stage fund she'd been building quietly through the winter. 3 companies so far, all of them the kind of beginning of something that she'd told him was what she actually wanted. She hadn't taken the black bag down from the shelf. She hadn't thrown it out either. He thought that was right. You don't discard the thing that carried you through the night you needed carrying. You just put it somewhere it doesn't have to do that work anymore. The peach tree grew. Not fast. It was a tree. And trees do not perform for your timeline. But by June it had new leaves, bright and specific, the particular green of new growth that hasn't hardened into itself yet. Lily checked it every morning with a regularity that suggested she was not entirely confident it would still be there, which he understood. You watch the things you care about. Victoria's book was finished in March, sent to her editor in a form that made the editor call her at 7 in the morning, which Victoria said was unprecedented and she was choosing to take as a good sign. He'd read it, or the parts of it she'd shown him, and it was not what he'd expected, though he wasn't sure what he'd expected. It was smart and unguarded in the particular way of someone who has stopped trying to seem smarter than they are. It was about building things, as she'd said, and what it costs, and the simultaneous yes and no of the answer. It had a chapter about her parents' hardware store in Macon. It had a chapter that was, he was fairly sure, partially about a house with 1.5 bathrooms and an oak tree, though his name wasn't in it and the details were changed. He didn't ask. Some things are the writer's. The board situation at the Hale Group resolved itself in the way such things do when the central figure declines to vacate. Gerard eventually resigned from the board, citing a desire to pursue other opportunities, which was the corporate language for defeat. Marcus sent Victoria a brief text that said, "Only done." She showed it to Ethan over dinner, and they said nothing, and that was the right amount to say about it. She went to New York in the spring for the publisher meetings. She went to San Francisco twice for the fund. She was not a person who stopped moving, and he hadn't wanted her to be. That was not what this was. When she traveled, she called. When she was here, fully. The way she'd learned to be in the months of the back porch, in the workshop, and the kitchen where you had to write things on the list if you took the last of them. He took the Chris craft out on the river on a Sunday in May. Not the first Sunday in May when the weather was still uncertain. The last Sunday in May when the weather had committed. He trailered it to the public launch and put it in the water, and it ran, which was the moment he always waited for, the first time a restored boat hit the water and ran under its own power. There was nothing quite like it. 35 years of accumulated sound and motion, and the particular smell of river water and engine, all of it telling you that what you'd done had worked, that the thing you'd brought back was actually back. Victoria was there. Lily was there in a life jacket with the toggle fastened wrong, which Ethan fixed, and she did not stand still in the boat for a single moment of the 2 hours they were on the river. The buyer, a man from Augusta named Terrence, who'd commissioned the restoration after seeing Ethan's work on a boat at a show, was meeting them at the dock. He'd been patient, almost 18 months from commission to delivery, and he stood on the dock when they came in and looked at the boat with the expression Ethan had learned to recognize, the intake of breath, the stillness, the moment before speech. "She's beautiful," Terrence said, not to Ethan, to the boat, the way you talk to boats. "She runs well, too," Ethan said. "How did you get the color on that mahogany?" "Time and the right treatment." Terrence crouched to look at the waterline. Victoria stood beside Ethan on the dock and said quietly, "You're not sad to let it go." "No," he said, "but you're something." He looked at the boat, at all the hours in it, all the mornings and evenings in the workshop, all the pieces found and fitted and replaced, the specific work of bringing something back to what it was always supposed to be. "Satisfied," he said. "It's the right word. The work is done, and the thing is what it should be. There's nothing sad about that." She leaned against his arm slightly. "The Lyman will be next." "A year at least," he said. "The Lyman is going to teach me things." "Everything good does," she said. "The peach tree was planted in April, and it will be years before it fruits. That is simply the nature of the thing. You don't plant a tree expecting immediate return. You plant it because you intend to be here, because you believe the future is a place worth furnishing, because the act of putting something in the ground and tending it is itself an answer to the question of whether you belong somewhere." Victoria Hale had spent 30 years being good at building things at speed, at knowing where she was going and getting there without too much looking sideways. She had arrived on Ethan Mercer's porch, in the rain, with a single bag and the accumulated weight of every choice that had brought her to that door. And she had knocked, not because she had nowhere else to go, but because she had, in some inarticulate pre-verbal part of herself, known that the door was worth knocking on. Ethan had opened it, not because he was waiting for her, not because he'd been hoping for something to arrive, because he was a man who opened doors when people knocked on them, who kept the porch light on even when there was no practical reason to, who had built a life modest enough in its ambitions and rich enough in its dailiness that there was room in it for someone who arrived unannounced and needed to stay. Neither of them had been ready for the other in the way we imagine readiness, clear-eyed, unburdened, certain. He was a divorced man with a workshop and a 5-year-old and 3 years of careful solitude he'd mistaken for peace. She was a woman in her 50s who had built an empire and was only beginning to understand that what she'd actually been building all along was a place to rest. They were both carrying things. They were both, in the specific way that life makes you, imperfectly equipped for what they found. And they chose it anyway. That is, when you strip away the sentimentality and the noise of other people's opinions and the complicated tangle of history and daughter and circumstance, the whole of it. Two people choosing, in full knowledge of their own limitations and each other's, to try. Not dramatically, not with speeches or grand gestures, with junk drawers and sawdust and Tuesday evenings and a tree planted in a specific corner of a backyard in Savannah, Georgia, where the afternoon light happened to be good. There's a version of this story that doesn't happen, where Victoria goes to the hotel, where Ethan doesn't open the door, where the small window of readiness that opened that night closes again, and both of them go on in their careful, separate lives. That version exists. It was a real possibility. The thing that separated the version that happened from the version that didn't was not fate and not circumstance. It was the decision, made in a moment, to trust that the knock was worth answering. He thinks about this sometimes. Usually in the workshop, which is where he does his best thinking. The slow kind. The kind that happens underneath the work and surfaces when you're not looking for it. He thinks about what it costs to keep yourself closed and what it costs to open, and how the second cost is real and specific and scary in ways the first cost doesn't announce itself until much later. The first cost is quiet. You don't feel it all at once. You feel it in the slow accumulation of evenings alone that stop being peaceful and start being something harder to name. You feel it in the quality of silence that a house has when nobody else is in it, a quality that is only fully apparent when someone arrives and the silence changes. He'd felt it change the night she walked through his door. He hadn't had the language for it then. He has it now. The word is home, not the house. The house is just a house, paint peeling on the window trim, 1.5 bathrooms, a workshop in the yard. Home is something you make. You make it out of the people you choose to keep, the routines you build together, the things you plant knowing you'll tend them for years before they give you anything back. It doesn't arrive assembled. You build it in the way Ethan builds everything, piece by piece, with patience and the right tools, and the willingness to replace what's gone soft without grieving too long over what you had to let go. The black leather bag gathered dust on the high shelf in the guest room. On a Saturday morning in the fall of the following year, Victoria came downstairs to find Ethan in the kitchen with his coffee, Lily at the table with her reading homework, and a box on the counter that she didn't recognize. "What's that?" she said. "Donation," he said. "I'm clearing out the guest room, making space." She opened the box. Inside, among other things, was the black leather bag. She looked at it for a moment, lifted it out, felt its familiar weight, lighter than she remembered, or maybe she was stronger. She turned it over in her hands. "Okay," she said, and set it back in the box. She poured her coffee, sat at the table. Lily showed her the reading passage about weather patterns, which Lily found legitimately interesting because Lily found most things legitimately interesting, which was perhaps her best quality and certainly Ethan's favorite thing about her. The box went to the donation center that afternoon. The bag had carried her through the night she needed carrying. It had done its work. Now someone else could have it, could fill it with whatever they needed to carry, could take it wherever they needed to go. She already had everything she'd been looking for. So did he. The peach tree grew.